As Dawn's already said, I'm from the Australian National University. Quick introduction about me. Australian National University, but I'm originally from Melbourne. I was born and raised here. I'm responsible for technical infrastructure for one of the colleges within the university. The university itself is sort of broken up into many sort of independent units that all have their own HR and their own IT. When I'm not at work, I continue to write Puppet to help my dad. It actually does work. So, quick introduction about the area in the university I work. Dates back to 1946. We have 220 academic staff, supported by 170 general staff. Of that, maybe 15 to 20 RT. Over 2,000 students and 9,000 alumni. We're a non-discipline college, so everything from economics, political studies, Asian subjects, languages, culture. And a fun fact is that we actually have more IP addresses than North Korea. Public ones anyway. Just a quick question. Out of everyone here, who works in an organisation where there are multiple IT departments that are arm's length from each other? Hands? What, a quarter? Maybe an eighth. So, to the more nitty-gritty technical details. Within this college alone, we host over 60 websites. Across those websites we get around 5,000, 6,000 visitors a day, which I know doesn't sound that fantastic, although one of them, which is a blog on Southeast Asian politics, will often peak up to 1,000 and 100,000 in one night. I think that was the Indonesian election. They were doing live coverage. And on another occasion, I think it peaked to 80,000, the site broke, and I got a phone call while I was on an ice cream date. And these sites can run anything from Drupal to WordPress and even what I call antique artisan PHP. Just another question, has anyone had the, I'm not sure if it's nice to say, misfortune of inheriting PHP that's written by possibly people who aren't programmers? Yes. But I'll give a bit of backstory and then go back to the aim. Many years ago, I worked for a small IT firm that did everything from managing desktops all the way to running learning management systems on Linux and Windows, and web hosting, email hosting, and all that. And my role did cover everything from supporting people on the phones to running up Linux servers. And we'd often, since we're a small company of only 4 staff, we'd each have a one-on-one meeting with the managing director, or to make ourselves seem like they call themselves principal consultant. One day in one of these meetings, we had this problem we need to consider configuration management. And Puppet was brought up, and someone uttered the following words. Puppet sucks. Puppet is written in Ruby. Ruby sucks. I'd like to think I have matured a little bit in the past 5 years. I'm still kicking myself. Explain later on. Again, another question. Has anyone, to be honest, had similar thoughts, apprehensions, configuration management, or even programming languages? Alright, not that anyone's willing to try. So, instead of saying configuration management or even shell scripts, we had a document detailing installation and configuration of Oracle Linux 6 since CentOS 6 has not been released yet. And my boss's favourite saying was free, everyone's favourite price. I'm not sure, it would take maybe 2 to 3 hours to set up a machine based on these instructions. Somewhere in there it's saying, build PHP, disable SE Linux. I know that the RMT guys were talking about having these configuration work documents. Who else had them? Oh, come on, I know everyone has them. You probably know what could go wrong with yours. With the benefit of hindsight, skimming over the documents that are making this presentation, turning off SE Linux, bad idea, there's better solutions. Even though I have a reputation these days as an SE Linux fanboy, and if you don't understand SE Linux, I highly recommend the colouring book. This isn't a joke, it does exist, it's an official Red Hat publication. But moving on from that segue, also, compiling software by hand, all these random arguments, and then having to do it for however machines you run up, and then on top of that, buffer overflow, heart bleed, whatever, and then having to rebuild everything all over again. Why not let the vendor worry about that? I'm sure some people are familiar with the security issues with setting up PHP FPM incorrectly. I'm pretty sure this documentation tells me to do it that way. And you're more of the same, compile this, do this convoluted process that you may change your mind about later. Turning off the firewall. I can't believe I actually wrote this. Disabling unnecessary services. A good idea, but why were they installed in the first place? So aside from that, what could go wrong with this fantastic document? As the guys from RMIT were saying, let's not forget that we're all human, and humans make errors, humans forget steps, humans interpret things differently to other humans. And then on top of that, we have this whole thing of, all right, now I figured out the better way of doing this, or there's something wrong with the FPM configuration. Do I do it for new systems, or run back to the old ones, and then redo it again, or just say, you know what, we'll just rebuild them later, or... So then I moved to the ANU. I'd like to think many years later, then reality was only 3. And when I started as the web systems administrator there, the environment was virtual appliance based. We paid a low monthly fee to this company. In turn, we could download a virtual appliance, learn some VMware, IP address, desired password, and it was all up and running. And you could pick from WordPress, Drupal, OTRS. And it was simple to upgrade them as well. You would just download the new appliance, run a backup of the old one, and restore it on the new one. Simple. 15, 30 minutes maybe, so for VM. And you also knew your backups worked because the upgrade process was the same as the backups. So, this sounded perfect to the manager who picked it. In theory. So one of the first problems was that the VMs out of the box could only support about 10 users. They weren't tuned. It was like the Ubuntu 14.04 default Apache configuration. So we had one of these. Another quasi version control authority Word document. This one I think I fished out of my email because that's the store authority configuration documentation. And again, what could go wrong? Or as a good friend of mine would say, what could possibly go wrong? Possibly go wrong. That's the first thing to go wrong. So, banging on like a broken record. Humans make errors, humans forget steps, humans interpret things differently to other humans. And on top of that, we didn't forget that a machine existed. So, Luke here out of the machine never told me about it. And then sometime down the track, customer or client would be like, oh, so this website, you do your ping, you dig, like, wait, what? What's that machine? What's its password? Just out of interest, has anyone had a problem like that where there are machines that they've then later discovered actually exist? Few? More? Yeah. And it kept happening. What actually went wrong on top of that was the custom configurations were never collected in the backups. So you have to redo that entire Word document every time you were doing an upgrade or disaster recovery. Another instance was that someone had put a WordPress install inside a WordPress install. They must have really liked WordPress. So I went one night, because the thing was compromised or whatever, frantic, it's like, oh, it'll be easy, I'll just, restore the backup, everything will be fine. Only to find that it had copied the entire old version of WordPress onto it and not upgraded what I wanted. And then, of course, you'd also have this problem of if you put files where the virtual appliance backup script wasn't expecting them, they would disappear. Things I personally admit to being culpable for. The Windows system means changing IP addresses of the Active Directory DNS servers. And because I didn't really have a comprehensive inventory, I forgot to change it on various machines. Appliances. And would only find out that I'd forgotten when those websites became really slow or broke completely, as DNS queries timed out. The other one was in the instructions, there was one very explicit here, install TCSH. I personally don't like it. I think it's clumsy and horrible. But the IT manager, who was one of the, like from his birth to 45 years old, had grown up using Unix and grown up using TCSH and was used to the muscle memory. So every time he jumped on a machine, was sitting there figuring out a problem, go TCSH, command not found, and then look at me, I'm slick down. And the other one was, I'd forget to put machines into Nagios, and then they'd go down, and then we'd only find out when some academic called the IT manager very upset. Guess we sort of found out in the end. Now, is Luke from Puppet in the audience? Cool, so I was going to say, please accept my apologies for horrible Puppet code. Nagios problem solved. So, every machine gets supplied, including our Windows servers, and then automatically sets up a check. So the minute we install the Puppet agent on it, and I think the Windows sysadmin had already set up group policy to deploy it, automatically get a check. At least we knew if the machine had gone down. Probably 5 minutes to write Puppet code, and that's it. Never have to worry about Nagios again. So after I got comfortable in a role, I was given a project to decommission an old Solaris stack. The management machine for this, I guess equivalent to your Puppet Master, was a 1997 vintage Sun Enterprise 450. I was just starting primary school back then. The web server was 2003 vintage Sun 5 V440. This is early high school for me. And it also predates the organization it belongs to. Going to go for another quick question here. Is anyone currently running vintage hardware in production and mainframes don't count? Just one? Oh, that's sort of surprisingly small.
12 years now.
How old?
12.
12? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What's the uptime?
Pretty good actually. Yeah.
So the V440 we had was up for 1,200 days, which meant that I don't think it's had kernel updates for 1,200 days.
There are no patches for these machines.
For Solaris 9?
This is XPUX 11.11.
Oh. My condolences. And also the same sort of custom Apache and PHP. And when I inherited it, the guy who was responsible for it had since left 12 months earlier, and I'm fairly sure that stuff was built probably 12 or 24 months before that. I think I do actually have a large, thick sheet of paper from IT security with a Nessus scan. Red is bad. It turns out there's another color above that, purple. It had like 8 pages of that. And there's 40 websites using IP-based virtual hosts. So the thing also had like 50 virtual NICs on it. And you'd find out that, oh, this website's actually on that by grepping through ifconfig. And on top of that, they had sub-sites that Apache was basically all being configured to sort of and import this file, or and switch over to this directory as an alias. And you'd only figure this out by reading through the Apache document and following an include to another one, or random Perl scripts. So when I first started, this is what I thought the setup was. You had this front-facing web server. Database server was also the way that people accessed or manipulated content, so with Samba and FTP, but it turned out it was actually an NFS export on another machine that actually ran its own SMB server, and a mail server. And so, we could decommission this machine here because it did nothing. It ran cron jobs. We really don't need an entire Sun enterprise server for that. But then it turned out, actually this machine here is a DNS server as well. Ugh. And it has another name on top of its 8 names and IP addresses and virtual aliases. And then it turned out I was wrong. This isn't the SMTP server, that is. So the plan was to move it all to RHEL 6, running on E6i and vSphere. The advantages I believe we were going to gain was the hardware would be in warranty, modern operating systems with patches available, and also an opportunity for me to do things in a way that I thought would be better. Looking at other people's things and hindsight, all that. So, where did Puppet come into all this? So, bear in mind, I've written this code maybe a year or a year and a half ago. But I created a custom type that sort of represented what sort of service we're providing. A simple website. You'd ask me for a website, I'd say, okay, what domain name do you want? in this particular case, continue on. As I said, you put as the Puppet resource name the site, and then it will automatically use this for the htdocs folder by going /r/www/fqdn, and also the actual server name. However, if you put this redirect thing, so I actually want to point it to this website here, it wouldn't bother with a htdoc, because it turned out we actually had quite a few sites that was just a PHP document that would generate a 301. Or what is it, that HTTP tag in the metadata in the headers. Onto a more complicated example. Same sort of thing, so it would create a vhost and then the user would manipulate it using SFTP or Git or whatever. But they needed a database, so I made this hosted database resource type. And the idea was, you put the name there, what you want the database to be called, the user, password, where you wanted it, and then it would automatically set up the database server with that database using the Puppet Labs MySQL module, set up firewall rules so that web server was always able to talk to that database server, and set up the user so that that web server could access it. So basically all the tedious stuff you have to do to get a simple site up that you really don't want to. So I was able to provision sites in 5 minutes instead of messing around big hosts and taking about 30 minutes to pull up a site. Basically copy, paste, put it in there, apply it to the host, and done. The site was running. And then quickly move stuff off that old stack. I believe it's also much easier to read something like that than a 50-line Apache vhost file. And all the databases and the firewalls were set up. Not wanting to sound like a broken record though, going back to what Keith said this morning, abstractions matter. When you have decent abstractions, like for example, this is all the questions you'll ask from your client, and then from there you do all the hard work. You can then start going back underneath and adding simple improvements. So, for example, IT security would call up and say, hey, you really should turn off directory indexes by default, or expose PHP. No problem, just add it in underneath and all the sites would get it in 30 to 45 minutes when the Puppet run happened. The web team would often ask me, I've made changes to the site, and Dev, can you check it out from Git into the production site? And I thought, I'll just get Puppet to do it, because I don't actually check their code anyway. If they tell me it's good to go, it's good to go. And more monitoring checks. Since Puppet already now knew this site was solely redirects, or this site was looking after something, it was very easy to add some extra code in. To say, all right, if it's meant to be a redirection, then set up an RDS check and always expect a 301, or always expect 200. And then that means that we now had checks for all the websites that we had provisioned. And if Drupal screwed up or WordPress screwed up, throw a 500, or if the site was no longer redirecting when it should, I'd know about it. Just out of interest, who likes writing documentation? So, why not get Puppet to do it for you? It's not as crazy as it sounds. We had simple things like, all servers starting with, capserve blah is a file server, and it's running Windows, and if it's running on this network, then it's probably not the DFS primary. If it's on this network, then it is the DFS primary. This is actually fairly simple stuff to express in Puppet. Now, I'm not a Ruby programmer, but this is what I had. And it was basically, saying, if it has this Puppet class and it's a web server that does SFTP hosting. If it's, starts with DC in the name, then it's an Active Directory controller. Simple stuff like that. Or, if it's on this IP address, then another department is hosting it for us. I'd like to think my managers love this stuff. Or as my girlfriend would say, it's all about the visuals. So here, it says this machine ML2 provides web hosting with users logging on via SFTP to update content. Host on ITS infrastructure has this much RAM, these many cores, and runs rel. Or capserve 4, it's a Windows Server 2012, it's a file server, and it's normally the DFS secondary, and it has very little memory. Moving on to the other benefits, we've got Puppet Enterprise. We got into Puppet Enterprise I think after I broke Foreman. It's not Foreman's fault, I just didn't know what I was doing. And Puppet Enterprise came with M Collective, and we initially just used it for like, oh yeah, I made changes, I can't be bothered SSHing to the machine to run Puppet agent-t. We'll go into M Collective or Live Manager and say, hey, run Puppet. And then came the problem of, okay, you have 20 VMs or 30 VMs, and we need to yum update all of them, or apt-get upgrade, apt-get update, or something like that. It was a Ubuntu machine. So, found out using M Collective, you need to tell it on all the machines running Red Hat, running update. Or, on all the Windows machines that are on this network, reboot. And this isn't even the best way to do it. So, where to next? Currently working on a new web migration project to move everything from the kit now building onto central ANU infrastructure. It's a difference between 4 ESXi hosts to 90, or a difference of a semi-impressive setup of 90 grand to one that costs 5 million. And 10 gig Ethernet instead of 1 gig, and all these small things. And so now that I've had hindsight of how I could do things better, want to leverage Hiera. Because if your Puppet code is the how, then Hiera is the what. Separating the sort of code or the business logic away from what actually needs to be provisioned means I can then delegate the provisioning to the service desk. So when someone wants a website, I don't need to know about it, they fill it all in, and the site appears. More Git. Who here has to implement ITIL in their organization or has had ITIL mentioned? So I have this feeling that, at least with Git, if you have to raise an RFC for a change, which you have to do quite a lot in ANU, you can then, check it into Git and say, all right, this is for RFC blah, 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 blah. And then everyone knows when if something happens, you can find out when that problem happens, as opposed to at the moment where it's sort of like, oh yeah, I think I changed something 3 weeks ago. And Git also means R10K, which not only makes module development easier because it will check out individual Git repos for each module instead of trying to chuck them all in one. But it also means that you can then factor it into disaster recovery. If you need to rebuild your Puppet master from scratch, no problem, just point into the the repositories with the R10K configuration, and everything's back to normal again. Hopefully. And more monitoring. Because once we have the right abstraction, we can do stuff right down to, well, we know that because we provision this database, we'll also set up a check from the machine that actually needs to access it to make sure nothing's happened. Or performance metrics, so that down the track okay, this doesn't look normal compared to the previous trend, I should investigate it before an actual problem happens. And these are just the lower hanging fruit we've come up with for now. That ANU will be discussing about using, with between my colleagues in other departments, using Puppet for Mac desktop management, trying to integrate into ServiceNow. If anyone uses ServiceNow here, or any other sort of ticketing system? Yeah, one. And then even just sitting and watching the other presentations today, saying, that is a fantastic idea, I should write that down and do it back when I get to Canberra. Any questions? Nothing? This has actually been the first talk I've done in front of a large audience, so if I seem a bit jittery or fast, that's probably why. I would really appreciate your feedback or constructive criticism. I'd also like to quickly thank Rob and Brett, if they're in the audience from Puppet Labs, for being supportive and patient, as well as my colleagues from ANU, since they also listened to a dry run of this yesterday. And thank you for listening and your time.
So we're sure there are no questions?
Any question? Crazy
Any
questions?
questions? I'll just stand here awkwardly and
Yes.
someone asks.
What's in the colouring book?
In the colouring book? Well, since we have extra time. All of them. Let's see what it is. Okay, let's see if I can get this.
Oh, you got it.
Where's full screen here? Full screen. Alright, so that's the front page. It explains how SQLink's type enforcement works using the analogy of a cat and a dog. So the idea is to have a policy rule, a cat is allowed to eat cat food, a dog is allowed to eat dog food, and so, they're both happy. But when the dog tries to eat the cat food, the kernel prohibits it. And of course, it will scold the cat for eating the dog's food. Sorry, so then it's talking about multi-category enforcement. It's using the analogy of you have two dogs, Fido and Spot. Dog chow 1, random 1, dog chow, random 2. Dog 1, dog 1, dog 2. And basically says that the dog's not allowed to eat the cat chow at all, ever. But it can eat its own dog chow. But it's not allowed to eat the other's dog chow. It then moves on to multi-level security enforcement, which is sort of like the idea of we work in, say, ASIO or something, and I have a secret clearance and you have a top secret clearance. You can read stuff I've done, but I can't read stuff you've done. So again, it uses the analogy of you have a greyhound and a chihuahua. The greyhound's allowed to eat whatever he likes as long as it's dog food, not cat food. The chihuahua's allowed to eat the chihuahua food, but the chihuahua is not allowed to eat the greyhound's food. And this is the proof I was saying about that it is actually an official Red Hat documentation.
That's excellent.